Hey, what's going on guys? Cookies here. This is how to heal Spires of Ascension. We're going to be breaking down all of the individual mobs that are really important to understand as a healer, and we're just going to be running through the entire dungeon from start to finish. So, as we go into this first pull, this is going to be a big first pull, but I'm going to break down the important mobs as we go. So we're going to start with the Forsworn Vanguard, which actually gets pulled right at the start. And all these guys do is just a frontal on the tank, so you just want to be aware, because if you're standing with the tank, if you're like a melee healer for instance, like I'm playing a Paladin here, or if you just run ahead with the tank like this and stand in the middle, kind of like how the other DPS are in this pull, you have a chance of getting hit by the melee, so you just want to be mindful of it. I'm sure that these guys were completely mindful of it. It's just like when you're running right here, you just have to be careful not to step in front of the vanguards. So if there's a vanguard in the pull, just don't stand with the tank or don't stand in front of the vanguards, and then you should be fine. Next up, we're going to talk about the Forsworn Mender. So the Forsworn Mender is also pulled with the first pack, so I'm just going to rewind it just a tiny bit so we can see him do his initial cast, which is important. And he's going to do two things. He's going to do Imbued Weapon, which you should see here in a second. He's marked with star right here. If you can see his nameplate, just try to keep an eye on it. So when we go into this pack, he's going to cast Imbued Weapon. There it is right there. And then you can see it applies a buff to himself right here that I'm tracking. It has 5 stacks. And it basically just makes him do AoE damage to, like, it splashes his damage from the tank to other people around him. So you want to dispel this debuff immediately, or this buff rather, immediately. And what happens when it gets dispelled is, you'll watch here in a second. There it gets dispelled. You could barely see it, but there's a little tiny weapon that flies out from him when the buff gets dispelled. It flies like right here next to me. It kind of goes like where my weak wards are. You'll see it like fly out from him. I'll try to slow it down. Let's see. Where is it? There it is right there. So it lands on the floor right here under my weak auras. And then what somebody can do is a melee DPS or the tank. Anybody who does auto attacks for their damage in melee can pick this up, and it makes their melee swings do huge amounts of AoE splash damage to the group. So I believe here I pick it up. So there we go. And then you'll watch, like, as I hit the mobs, like, obviously it's hard to tell because we have a Druid doing 85k DPS, but my DPS went up, like there it's going up quite a bit. It went up from like 12k to almost 18k. Now it's above 18k. So you want to purge those off of the mobs. You can do that with Arcane Torrent. You could do it with Spell Steal as a mage. You could do it with Shaman. Priest, all those classes that have a purge ability can get rid of that, and then you just have a melee player pick it up. Doesn't really matter which melee player. There are some classes that benefit more than others, but as long as somebody picks it up, it's still beneficial. Okay, so next we have the Forsworn Castigators. So I'm gonna again just rewind it back a bit. We're gonna talk about the Castigators. So they do two important, they do two important casts, which is gonna be Dark Lash, which you can see right here. This Castigator marked with green is casting it right now, and it's targeting the tank. And what that does is Dark Lash will just target random players in the party and just do a moderate amount of damage to them. So you want to keep the group nice and healthy whenever the Castigators are alive and interrupt these as much as you can. But the Castigators also do an ability called Burden of Knowledge, and that is going to be way more important to interrupt or make sure that doesn't happen as a cast, because if it does a massive amount of damage to whoever gets the debuff. So I'll show you in a second here. There was the first Burden of Knowledge on green. It literally got instantly interrupted. This is purple casting it now. You can see right here, Burden of Knowledge. And we'll see if it goes off. It gets interrupted. If that cast goes off, it is okay. You can recover from it. Basically, it's going to apply a debuff to one random player in the group and does initial damage no matter what. So it's like a Dark Lash hitting them. So it hits them for initial damage. And then it's going to put a 5-second magic debuff on them. That's going to tick for a ton of damage over the next 5 seconds. So basically the way you deal with it is if the cast goes off, which a lot of the time when you're pugging keys and doing stuff like that, it's going to go off. Like, you should almost expect it to go off. You just want to be on the trigger ready to dispel the person who gets it immediately. So like what I can do here is say I'm pugging a key and I'm going to expect the Castigators to cast Burden of Knowledge. I am going to watch here, and then As soon as this burden goes out, I can see who it's targeting because of the nameplates I'm using. So I see it's targeting Jelly, which is our tank. So if this cast were to go off, I am literally going to instantly dispel our tank as soon as he gets the debuff. Like you'll see his, if you watch others, I have a bunch of Spires of Ascension videos on my YouTube channel. So you can just look at those and like see examples of when I did pug keys and just how fast you want to dispel this debuff or how it works when the cast actually goes off. I don't know if any casts actually end up going off here. I'd assume not, but we will see. Okay, what else do we have? That's me getting hit by a frontal. That's what we want to avoid because I'm like literally standing on top of the tank right now, which is bad. Oh, here's a burden of knowledge that it looks like it's about to go off. So this, yeah, this cast, there it went on the mage. It said it was targeting the tank, so I don't actually know why it did that because it usually does tell you who it's targeting. So that just might be a slight inaccuracy on the add-on or something like that. But either way, ready to dispel right away. And then see the mage ticks down. I should be dispelling him. He ends up blocking it off because I took too long to dispel. And then we're back onto the pool. So that's a case of where like I should have been more on top of dispelling that immediately. But I probably stopped paying attention to it because the Castigator was so low. I wasn't expecting another cast. But you should pretty much always expect a cast. Okay, and then the last mob in this poll is the Forsworn Goliath right here. So the Forsworn Goliath only does one important thing, which is Rebellious Fist. It just does a cast. It needs to be interrupted. Otherwise, he does unavoidable group-wide damage to everybody within a large radius. You can outrange it if you run very far away. But honestly, in most key levels, you can survive this. I've done like a plus 24 fortified Spires, even at 25, I'm pretty sure, the other week. And this has gone off and we still survive. Like, so you can survive it, just make sure everybody's healthy. And if the casts are going off, just be ready to keep the group topped up and do a lot of AoE healing and stuff like that when the Goliaths are active. Okay, and then we have, let's see. After that, this is just a copy pack. This is also a copy pack, so we're just going right into the boss after this. And I'm just going to fast forward to the part to where we're not fighting trash with the boss, just to make it a little easier to digest the information. So we have two bosses here. They are shared in HP. They share HP. And basically, they each have their own kind of mechanics, but we have... I guess the easiest way to break this down as a healer is there's two phases. There's a phase where both bosses are active and hitting the tank, or rather, like, I guess one doesn't always hit the tank. This bird just kind of runs around and does its own thing, and then this is the actual boss that hits the tank. So whenever Kintara is down on the ground, that is when you want to be healing your tank a lot and focusing on healing, whether it be the group or the tank. Just keep everybody topped off, and then like you have these debuffs right here. This is called Dark Lance. She'll occasionally do it. She does it at the start of the fight, and then she'll do it periodically every time she comes down. And it just puts two debuffs, two magic dispel debuffs on people, on two people. And then you just want to dispel one person and then heal the other. So like here I bubble myself and then I can dispel the tank, so it gets rid of both debuffs fairly easily. But if you don't have a way to immune it off, then you just dispel one, heal the other. And then while the boss is down here, so while Kintara is attacking the tank, again, you just want to be really focusing healing into the tank and not letting them fall down, because she'll be doing overhead slashes, which look like a frontal ability, but they're actually not. They only hit the tank, and they do like a heavy amount of damage, so that's why you want to keep the tank very healthy. And then other than that, this is the other phase where the boss flies up into the air and she'll just do circles around the room and not auto-attack anybody, but instead she'll throw charged spears occasionally at people, and you just, again, want to keep those players topped off. So here it's on the Demon Hunter. You're going to see him get hit by it. He takes a little bit of damage, and we heal him back up. And then that's the end of it. And that's pretty much all you need to do for this fight, is when the boss is up in the air, you can do damage and focus more on helping your team get through the pole, and then just focus healing into the people that get hit by the charged spears. And then when the boss is down on the ground, you should be putting a lot of your attention into healing the tank and healing these debuffs when they come out. So that is it for the first boss. Next up, we have the Etherdivers here on this pole. And the Etherdivers are going to only do one thing that's dangerous, which is a cast called Insidious Venom. You'll see it here in a second. There it is. And what this does is if the cast goes off, as you can see there, one got interrupted, one did not. It puts a debuff on the tank. This debuff hits extremely hard. It's just a very heavy hitting dot, and it stacks. So say if this purple one goes off also, it's going to put a second stack on the tank. And as you can see what I did there, because there's, so like for instance, when we go into this pull up here, there's 3 of the Etherdivers, so that means there's 3 potential debuffs that could go out, and they all usually kind of sync up and cast them at the same time. This one just comes in late. So because I see that, this one's still casting, I'm going to wait to dispel until this one potentially gets its cast off, and then I dispel. Because what you don't want to get stuck in is dispelling the tank when he gets 1 stack, and then 2 of them cast the ability and apply 2 more stacks to the tank, and now you don't have a dispel for the next 7 seconds, and the tank is just going to essentially bleed out from this ability. So you want to try to dispel in synchronization with like the actual Etherdiver's casting, because now my dispel will come up every time they're like starting to cast again. So that's it for the Etherdivers. The next mob in this pack is the Skirmishers. They don't do anything dangerous unless the tank is not in range of them. If the tank is not in range of them, they can do things to get away from the tank. They have like this ability where sometimes they'll jump away from the tank. And then they'll start casting Hurl, as you can see right here. So they start just hurling. They'll just spam cast this over and over, and it just hits random players in the group for a heavy amount of damage. So in Pugs, this is the pack specifically that usually gets really out of control. So what you want to do is just try to crowd control. As you can see, I hodged this one before it casts, and stuff like that. So you just want to be very mindful of the hurls, and instead of focusing on trying to do as much healing as possible, try to do a little bit more of like crowd control, you know, like controlling the damage output that they're dealing by using stuff like that, rather than, because it's really hard to just out heal it like without using any kind of other benefit. So next up we have these Forsworn Stealthclaws. They pretty much just do heavy damage to the tank constantly with their melees, and then they have a bleed that they apply as they auto attack and stuff. So I don't think you'll see the bleed on the tank, because I don't think I'm actually tracking it, but it's something to be aware of, is that even if the tank is kiting them, he'll probably still be taking damage from the bleed, so just be aware of that. And they do start out in stealth, so like for instance, when you walk into this room where they are, you want to be careful of walking out too far. As you can see, I sit further back by the stairs while the tank goes and picks them up, because what you'll see in Pugs a lot is people will walk out here, and if the tank walks by them but doesn't actually get any threat on them, they'll just aggro to whoever's closest to them, which means that they could potentially aggro to other people in the party that are walking up with the tank, and that's very, very bad. So try to stay back and wait until the tank pulls them all out of stealth, and then you can go in and do your thing. Same thing with healer aggro. Like if the tank walks out here, and say he walks up the stairs right here, and then say I didn't put bop on him and he ran right here, and then now I start healing him because he's taking damage from breaking these out of stealth, they could just instantly aggro to me. Or if there's one that's still stealth that the tank didn't pull out and I heal him, that stealth one is going to come for me, and I'm not even going to see it until it actually hits me, and then by then you're like going to probably be dead. I'll fast forward to the next mob to show this pack. So the next important thing is these Kyrian Dark-Praetors. They don't do very much as long as the tank is in melee, but if the tank steps out of melee, they're going to start casting Dark Seeker, which just hits the tank for a higher amount of damage than their melee attacks. So, and they do another similar thing to the guys that hurl, where they will dash out occasionally. They'll dash away. So you can stop those with stuns if you're fast enough, or if you have stuff like Vortex from Resto Druid, that's very beneficial. And I don't think roots like binding shot and stuff work, because they'll keep going until the root hits them, and then they'll just stop after their dash is already finished and then be rooted, if that makes sense. So basically, if the tank isn't in melee with the Praetors, just keep the tank topped up and be ready to kind of heal quite a bit through the Praetors auto attacks. This pool is all just copy stuff of things we've seen before. So next up we have the Forsworn Inquisitor. So there is one in this pack right here. We'll see if we can see it good enough. Yeah, so it's this orange marked mob. And what they're going to do is they basically are the exact same. They literally are the exact same. They just have a different name as the Castigators. So the Forsworn Castigators and the Forsworn Inquisitors. The Inquisitors spam cast Dark Lash again to random people in the group. And then instead of casting Burden of Knowledge, they cast something called Internal Strife, which is pretty much the exact same ability. It's something where you want to interrupt it, do not let it go off, but if it does go off, you need to dispel whoever gets it immediately. So you can see it right there casting, and if that cast were to go off, then you need to dispel whoever gets it immediately, otherwise it is like super, super dangerous. So you can pretty much just treat them like castigators. After that, we go to the boss, because this is all stuff that we've already fought. So for this boss, we have Ventunax, and Ventunax is going to do two main abilities, which is, they're kind of linked in the same ability, which is called Dark Stride. So periodically, the boss is going to jump to a random player in range. Specifically, it's going to be a ranged player. So there it goes on the Druid over there. And what that's going to do is apply a bleed for, I believe it's like 10 to 15 seconds, and it's a pretty heavy hitting bleed. So whoever gets the bleed, you're just spam healing them as much as possible and keeping them topped up. The tank damage is very irrelevant in this fight. The tank takes hardly any damage. So it's really just about spot healing the players who get hit by that bleed. And then when the boss casts Dark Stride, she leaves a puddle on the floor. It's kind of, it's like a cloud looking puddle. And it shoots out these little orbs that you just want to avoid. So just try not to get hit by these. They kind of, if you touch them, even before they've shot out, like even if they're just sitting there like that, you still get hit, and it can do a lot of damage. So try to stay away from the puddle on the floor, while also dodging them. And the puddle itself will also do damage, so you can't step on top of the puddle. So just be aware of that if you're in melee. And just as a fun fact for Paladin, you can bop the Dark Stride. So if like someone, like you saw at the beginning, as soon as it targeted the boomkin, I just bopped him just so I don't have to heal that first one. So that helps a little bit. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it for the boss. It's really just man, this boss ends up being really messy, doesn't it? Holy moly. The next mob we'll talk about is the Forsworn Helion right here. So the Helion just does constant, unavoidable AoE damage to your group. So you just want to have healing cooldowns ready for when this pull happens. It happens right after that second boss. And you just want to be very careful with keeping everybody topped up, and don't be afraid to spend pretty much every healing cooldown here, specifically on this Helion on the stairs, because there's nothing else dangerous to heal for quite some time, depending on like what kind of route you're doing. But if you're doing like the standard, what 90% of pugs do, this is the dangerous pull that you want to be using everything on. And it's not necessarily going to include the Executioner with it, but even if it's just the Helion by itself, you should still just come well prepared to fight the Helion and use healing CDs. Okay, and then after that, this is all copy stuff again. These Forsworn Usurpers that we're going to pull around the pillar, they are literally just the Skirmishers from before. Not the Skirmishers, they are the Forsworn Skirmishers that hurl. They just have a different name. And then we have this boss. So this is Oryphrion. And Oryphrion does Purifying Blast, which you just saw there, so I'll rewind it just a tiny bit. Which Purifying Blast just targets a random player. It can be melee or range. And it will hit them for a moderate amount of initial damage and then put a dot on them for about 10 seconds. But you can immune it, so they're like our Frost Mage immunes it. If they don't have an immunity, again, you can bop it, just like the last boss. Or if you're not playing a Holy Paladin, obviously, then you just need to be prepared to heal through it, or use other externals to help your DPS and whatnot get through it. The only person that won't get targeted by it is the tank, so even you can get targeted by it, so just be aware of that. And then the next ability the boss is going to do is Charge Stomp, right there, as you can see. It's after this Purifying Blast. And the Charge Stomp just does damage to the tank and everybody around the tank, so it'll be like a very large frontal, almost like even sometimes behind if you're too close, like underneath the boss, so just be very aware of that when it's happening. And the way that the Charge Stomp happens, because you'll be in some groups where it won't ever happen, and you'll be in some groups where the Charge Stomp is happening a lot. It's just based on where the tank's standing. So if the tank stands inside this red circle under the boss, the hitbox, it will activate Charge Stomp as much as it possibly can whenever there's a target, like whenever the person who's aggroed the boss is standing underneath it. So we have the tank initially stand under here to bait the Charge Stomp, like on purpose. And then as a Holy Paladin, you can cast Hand of Freedom on the tank, and it will make them immune to the initial damage of the Stomp, but they still get this debuff afterwards, which this debuff applies to everybody who stands under and gets hit by the Stomp initially. And it just does like, I think it does like a 50% haste reduction or something like that, and a little bit of damage over time. I don't remember exactly what it does, but it's something to do with that. Basically, you'll just want to dispel it. And then, other than that, it just repeats those two abilities over and over until the energy bar on the boss reaches 0, at which point it does this right here, which it will recharge Anima. As you can see right here, the boss takes double damage here, so this is where you'd want to help do damage. But you also need to heal whoever is soaking these orbs, which usually it should just be the tank that soaks all of them, and then you kind of just keep the tank topped up through the damage that it's going to deal, because they're going to essentially gain a stacking debuff that deals damage over time based on how many orbs they soak. So they can take like a lot of damage if they don't have defenses rolling and whatnot. But you can also alternatively use immunity. So if you're like playing a Paladin, you can run through and bubble all of them. If you have a mage, they can stand in the way and ice block, but typically you don't want DPS doing it just because the boss takes double damage. So it's better for the DPS to just sit there and DPS while the tank or the healer help deal with the orbs. Cool. So that is that boss. And next we're going to talk about... oh, you can see here I soaked them with the bubble at the end because our tank didn't have any defenses rolling. And then I don't even get the debuff. We'll go upstairs and we'll talk about these angels. So there's 3 angels up here when you get here before the last boss. The first one we'll talk about is Astronos, which is here in the middle. And what he does when we come up, he's the angel directly in the middle of the 3. And they each essentially have a unique ability, and then when they die, the others gain that unique ability. So it like essentially you're just fighting 2 of them in one. But here we double pull, so we're going to be dealing with the 2 abilities anyways, but I'm still going to explain them one at a time. So Astronos does something called Charge Spear. It'll target a random player. I think it can even target the tank, and it just puts a swirly on the floor. You need to get out of it, and then it will leave behind a spear on the ground, and the spear... So there you can see the spear got thrown, and there it is on the ground. And the way that the spear is angled on the floor is the way that it's going to shoot out these like black waves that you see coming out from the spears. So like for instance, we have, let me show an example with the pen tool real quick. And no, you do not have a Discord notification. That is me. Sorry about that. Let me just put this back in full screen. So we have these 2 spears on the floor. So one is going to, do I need to, oh, I actually need to not be in full screen. Okay, let me close out of Discord. So this one here, for instance, because the spear is angled like this, do you see how it's like angled in the floor like that? That means that the pattern, it's going to make a cross pattern, and it's going to be out from the way it's pointing. So the way that it's like angled, it's going to shoot off in that direction. So that means it's going to go there, it's going to go this way, and it's going to go that way, and it's going to go like that. But the way you initially can tell is the way that the spear is like angled. So here it's like angled down, and that means it's going to shoot out like that, and then it would shoot sideways and backwards. I mean, that's not exactly perfect, but hopefully you understand what I mean. By the way, that's how you predict like which way the waves are going. So there you can see it shoots out from the spear. And then we have Lakesis here, which is the other person that we pulled. And what they do is, you can't see it on my party frames, but you can see it up here on my debuffs. It's just a constant stacking debuff that the mini-boss applies to everybody in the group. And it just increases the amount of damage that you take. So the debuff literally just says, you know, increases damage taken by X%, and X is however many stacks you have, and the stacks just keep going until the angel dies. And so those abilities, when these guys die, it's going to apply those abilities to the next angel that we fight. So I will explain this last angel, just how they are, and then they'll have the added abilities on top of it that we already explained. So Klotos, what Klotos does is constant. You can see the debuff right here on the party frames. It just does damage over time based on how many stacks you have. So the more stacks you have, the more damage you're taking over time. And this, coupled with the constant increase in damage taken and the charged spears, is incredibly, incredibly deadly. So this mob is usually what people will lust on or use cooldowns and stuff for. And as a healer, the other two angels that you, whatever order you do the angels in, the first two will generally be very, very easy and require like little to no healing, except on the tank. And then this last angel will always be a super big pain, and you'll have to heal a lot and use healing cooldowns and stuff like that. So just be aware of that. You can watch here as we get it a little bit lower, like the amount of damage that people are taking. Like the Demon Hunter, for instance, he has a defensive rolling, and he's literally taking like 20% of his health and damage every single couple of seconds. But that is pretty much it. And then we have the last boss here. So this is Devos, and she does a few main abilities. The first one is going to be Run Through. It's just going to target a random player and then do a dash towards that player, and you just need to be out of the way. And then let's see. Next up we have this debuff right here that you can see, which is Lost Confidence. And what Lost Confidence will do is it applies the debuff to 2 random people, and you just need to dispel one, heal the other. We kind of talked about that earlier on like the first boss, but you really, really want to keep whoever you don't dispel, they need to be kept topped up like as much as possible. And you can use immunities and stuff to remove this debuff, so that's always helpful. And eventually you can dispel it on the last couple seconds, so you do want to do that as soon as you can, but you're essentially choosing whoever is the tankier between the two, or whoever has defensives. And the reason that you have to keep them topped up is because of that right there. So you'll get the debuff, like here we're going to get 2 more Lost Confidence. And then the last ability that I was going to mention is this right here, this bubble that's on the floor. You just need to come stand in this. I'm going to rewind it just a tiny bit. So here we get Lost Confidence. I dispel myself, keeping the DH topped up. And then this bubble spawns. We need to stand in it by the time that the boss casts Abyssal Detonation. And Abyssal Detonation will just do a heavy amount of damage to everybody inside the bubble and do lethal damage to everybody outside the bubble. And see, like there, it does so much damage. So if someone has that debuff going, the Lost Confidence, and that explosion goes off, that's why you have to keep them very, very, very healthy, because it's an incredibly dangerous combination of abilities. And then here I dispel myself, the mage is going to ice block it, and that's pretty much how you deal with the boss. And then we have the intermission here that I'll explain real quick, and then it just rinse and repeats from here. The intermission, basically you just need to go grab these orbs and then bring the orbs to the middle where the spear is, and then your group will handle the rest. But what else is happening during this intermission is people are going to just constantly be gaining this stacking debuff, and they'll gain more stacks if they get touched by the little puddles on the floor during the intermission, and the debuff just does continuously increasing damage over time. So you just want to, I would generally say healing cooldowns are best used like towards the end of the intermission when you're kind of finishing up, because then when you come out of the intermission, you still have those stacks lingering on you, and you need to get rid of them somehow or heal through them. They are dispellable though, so during the intermission, the biggest tip I can give is just be dispelling as much as you possibly can. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully this little guide was helpful for you guys. I hope you've been enjoying these videos, and I'm excited to get into 9.2. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.